Blessings in the Streets podcast. I am your host, Joseph B. Roberts, and in studio with me today is a phenomenal woman that I had the pleasure of recently connecting with across the lines of social media. Came across her page, had a chance to see some of her content, and immediately was amazed and pleased to see that she was truly a woman of God, trying to share the message of who God is and what He represents in our lives, and just being an open and transparent spirit to pour in and to encourage others. And so that's a perfect fit for anybody who knows anything about this podcast. That this is exactly the type of individual that we want to be a part of this experience. So I took the time to reach out to her, and she graciously accepted the invite. And so we have her with us today, prepared to share a little bit of her journey, a little bit of her story, again to encourage, to inspire, to uplift, and be of a powerful source of encouragement, if you will, hoping to impact and change lives in the best way that she knows how and in the way that God has positioned her to be used accordingly. So it is my privilege and honor, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce to you today our special guest, Miss Angela Kimble. Angela, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. God bless you for that. I'm so thankful and gracious to be here. And I pray that I can be a big blessing to everybody, including yourself. And I know that it will bless me even having this conversation. So thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you so much for accepting the invite. So, with that said, before we jump into our segments, I do want to give you an opportunity to give a general introduction of yourself, who you are, where you're from, what you do, kind of give our audience a snippet of who is Angela Kimball.
Okay, so the Angela Kimble right now is thankfully saved by the grace of God. I am a daughter of Zion, a servant of the Lord first and foremost. I don't really just give myself a title when it comes to that because to me the greatest posture is to first be a friend and daughter of the Lord, but then next to be the servant. So whatever He calls me to do in whatever moment, that's what I am. So if it's minister or evangelist or whatever, that's what I am. But I'm also on the side of that, I'm actually a full time nurse, a registered nurse. I'm a widowed mother of two and recently a grandma. And I really love music. I love to write poetry. Just pretty much like to do anything having to do with encouraging others, motivational speaking, being a mentor to many people. I've done it since I was a child. Was born in San Antonio, Texas, navigated throughout the area just because of poverty and things of that nature. But when I had some kind of stability, if you could call it, that was in Corpus Christi, Texas. And then after I finished my nursing school, my mother got ill. So I ended up coming right back to San Antonio. So that's where I live right now.
All right, all right. Well, thank you for sharing that intro for us. And again, as we move along through our podcast, we're going to learn more about you and your journey. So again, thank you for sharing that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Um, so with that said, let's go ahead and jump right into this thing. So, as is the case with all my guests that come on the show, I always emphasize the fact that I'm a firm believer in the importance of the beginnings of our journey. Really
Mhm.
taking the time to reflect back on how it all starts and being able to kind of piece together, making some sense of why did I go through, why did I experience, why did I encounter what I encountered, to kind of connect the dots, if you will, understanding
Mhm.
that later in life, okay, this is why these things had to take place in order for me to arrive at this particular moment in life. So with that said, we're going to have a little bit of that conversation with you at this time. And so if you would take us back to your childhood days, and if you would share with us, what was it like for you growing up? Fond memories that you have about growing up, as well as if there's any particular challenges that come to mind that you care to share, you can do that as well. Just kind of give us that foundational uh, basis of where your story begins.
Okay. I do have some good memories, but I feel led to tell you the harder parts because I think that that's where the need is mostly to hear about how you got through those things. So I'm going to share those things. And I just want to kind of warn the people just to prepare their hearts because it might pull up some memories for them. So I want to begin by saying that, when I was about, I think it was like 4, maybe 5 years old, I began to be molested and physically abused and sexually abused by a stepfather. Um, my biological father had moved on with somebody else because he had had an affair. There was a child that was a product of that. My mom couldn't deal with it. So she was like, I don't want to stay with you. And she pretty much became a victim to a predator because she saw that as, hey, here's my opportunity to move on. But that person saw as an opportunity to manipulate somebody while taking advantage of her children. And so from the time I was that age all the way up until about, I think it was like 12 or 13 years old, it continued. But he also was doing it to my older brother, who's no longer with us. So then my older brother began to do the same thing to me. And before I knew it, I don't even remember the age I was, but as it progressed, I began to be someone that this person would, and I'm talking about my stepfather about this part. He would manipulate me a lot. So he would say, today's, if you do everything I tell you the right way, so very controlling and manipulative, then I will not do XYZ abuse to you. But then he'd play games about it. So I would do what he'd say to minimize what my experience might be for that day. But then he would take me to his family, and most of his family were pedophiles. So
Mm-hmm.
it would just happen again, but through someone else. Um, and when I talk about this part, the Lord had already put in my heart back then to keep believing every day, to love them enough to believe that there's positive chance that they might change the next day. So every day was a new day of me taking new hits in my mind, in my emotions, in my heart, and in my spirit. And so in the midst of that, yes, my biological father was involved, but there was a lot of manipulation of the mind, and bullying tactics, intimidation tactics, where I would get starved or sleep deprived or different kinds of abuse to teach me to keep my mouth shut. And I just know that as a child, the Lord had already instilled certain things about me to be kind of like stubborn enough to be like, well, you know what? I might not want to like this abuse or have to take it, but what can I do to minimize your pleasure in what you're doing to me? So I learned how to push down a lot of my pain and begin to not cry about things, because I knew if I was giving the response that helped that person, it was just going to keep their addiction going. But what I want to say about it is, during this time, some of the other things that would happen was to shut my mouth, to mute me. So there was public humiliation. This man would get my mother to go with it because she'd be gone a lot because of sickness and work. So, no blame to my mother at all. I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea. But he would use that time as an opportunity, just to, let me handle the discipline. So he would convince her to let him discipline us how he wanted. So wet cowhide, electric cords, twigs, um, you know, withholding food, sleep, like I mentioned before, corporal punishment, that's something you might see on the movies for military people, like squat against the wall and you can't get up for a long time, tippy toe with your knee against, your nose against the refrigerator. These were the types of abuses men would do. But when it came to trying to make sure that I would keep my mouth shut, he would try to humiliate me in advance to try to make a fool of me. An example would be like making a tail, and it had the tiger, like a tiger tail print, and he stuffed it with cotton and sewed it shut, and then would put a safety pin. And he'd say, anybody that says any kind of thing that might even imply tattletelling, you're going to wear a tattletale publicly for the whole day. And I remember being in little league, being miserable, wishing I could tell, like I was like, somebody see me and know I'm in trouble without me having to tell you. Nobody noticed, and I was shocked how nobody thought anything of, why is Angela having to run around in her sports clothing with this tail to wear on her back, like on my backside. And I just said, I am embarrassed, but how can I take the pleasure out of this and the control away from this person? The Lord had me then already figuring things like that out. So I would act silly and make jokes and be silly about it, and it would anger him. So he'd find other ways of abuse. And so other things that happened during my childhood, we were in a lot of poverty during this time. Like I mentioned, my mom was in and out of the hospital, and she worked 3 jobs. And that left me under the care of him and other pedophiles, or my siblings who were very young. So, how would we properly take care of each other? So you can imagine the types of things that would happen when my brother would act out his anger. He used to get guns and shoot at my feet to try to get me to do what he wanted me to do. So you can imagine, of course, drugs come into the play of for my brother and him getting into trouble, and trying to teach us certain things. There was just a lot of different variations of abuse in our lives. I did have a sister that was older than me but younger than him, and then eventually a little brother. And so we went through all that, and it was me and my eldest that went through most of the abuse when it came to the sexual side. But later on, my stepfather began to try to do it to my older sister, and that's when it stopped because she told on him. She had the courage to tell on him. But the poverty that we were dealing with during that time, we had a lot of instability in where we lived, if and when we could eat. So like there was some good memories in that, because I would get excited when we would have meat, because we'd either minimize the meals we had, or a lot of bread and water, rice and beans, sometimes gravy, or gravy and bread would be our meals. Um, Living in shacks, and if we were cold, all in one room, kind of have our bodies against each other. And of course, I'd hate it because the pedophile would always try to force me to be the one there, and I just would feel icky. And meanwhile, I'd be seeing bugs fly up, like the flying roaches and rats and things like that. I mean, pretty rough things to have to deal with as a child. And then in the midst of that, having to go to school sometimes smelling like urine, like pancake syrup, because of the abuse I just endured. I couldn't control my bladder. Um, and I'd be embarrassed, and I'd be silently just wishing, like my spirit was just inside of me screaming, somebody see me, that I need help, because I can't tell you I need help. And trying to still have this heart to love other people and be kind. But you can imagine how that eventually turned into rage, anger, resentment, bitterness. I went from being a very sweet, loving young girl, who never understood why is this happening to me? Like, why am I being forced to watch pornography? I didn't even know what it was. I just was confused. Um, and I said, someday I'm going to tell my dad. But then that time never happened because my dad died before I could tell him. So then I lose my father. Then there's all this other abuse. Then this man gets pulled out of the life. And then I have people in between that. It seemed like I was some kind of magnet to sexual and physical abuse, and I didn't understand why. And so, to kind of close that out, it was just, for me, as a child, I didn't feel like I really was able to ever be a child, nor did I ever feel like I had innocence, because it was taken from me at such a young age. I My identity seemed to become my abuse, and to be fatherless in what my mind was, but to know lack, anger. I became to be violent. Got in gangs, and of course, as I got older, began to drink alcohol sometimes with friends. I became promiscuous, and then I began to start some types of drugs. Nothing too heavy, but I still did some drugs, and it was all trying to deal with that. And so I'm going to pause on that so we can go to where you want to go from there.
Wow. Let me first start off by saying I totally appreciate your transparency and what you've shared so far, and we're just early on
Mhm.
in the podcast here. Just the fact that you had to go through what you went through, and for you to be able to even sit here today and to speak of it, still in your right mind is a miracle in itself. It just shows the goodness of God. And I know people will hear stories like this, and I'm sure you've probably experienced it on your own. They hear stories like this, and then if you start to throw God into the conversation, there might be some people who are a bit skeptical about that, because they would say, well, if God is such a great and awesome and loving individual that you claim him to be, how could he possibly allow for you to have to endure what you went through? And again, I'm sure some of that is going to be answered as we move along, but the storms. We don't get to control exactly what those storms are going to look like for us, and especially as a young child, it definitely doesn't make sense. As you stated, it can be very confusing. It can cause you to have struggles with what your identity is. Just not knowing where you exactly fit in, because this just doesn't seem like it's supposed to be a thing for someone that's so young and innocent. Those moments in time where you're supposed to be having fun and pleasures that are associated with being a kid, and yet you're being compounded with all of this, what we want to call it, just this demonic presence, just this whole overwhelming existence, where it just, again, it's just confusing. And that's just confusing. It's debilitating mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. So again, you are definitely a living, walking miracle to have to endure that. And I just even appreciated, as you were sharing your story, how, while most of what you said was definitely horrible, to say the least, you found moments in the sharing of that story to highlight. I found the pleasures for you were just things like, we get to have meat today. Today, I was able to navigate a way where there were moments in time where, even though I felt controlled, most times I was able to take what was supposed to embarrass me and humiliate me and make some type of fun out of it, in a way where the person who was attacking me, the person who was trying to control me, couldn't get the benefit of it the way that he wanted to. In this case, like when you explained about the tail wearing, and how I made
Mhm.
a joke about it, and how that angered him, because a
Mhm.
person who has control issues, they want it to be a punishment to you. They don't want you to find some way to
Mhm.
navigate through that. And but see, that's a presence of how God can allow you to navigate in what was supposed to be meant to be harmful to you, was supposed to be meant for your destruction, for your demise. When it gets flipped, that is an offense to the enemy. That is an offense
Mhm.
to the one who wants to see you go through that suffering and pain, and you may not have even realize that that's what you were experiencing in that moment.
Mhm.
In those brief times where you actually had an opportunity to get a small win, if you
Mhm.
will, if you want to call it that. and
Mhm.
then and then I think the other thing that stands out to me, in what you said, you actually said it in your original introduction, when you described the fact that what you do for a living, that you're a nurse. And so, as you're sharing this story, and I'm thinking to myself, what are some of the characteristics and traits that go into being a nurse? You have to be somebody that wants to care and come alongside people in their time of need. They have some type of incapacitation in that moment, whatever that situation is. And
Mhm.
so, for you to go through what you go have gone through at such an early age, but then find yourself in a career path that involves you pouring into and coming alongside others, is a
Mhm.
testament in itself, because you now have a level of understanding, a level of sympathy, a level of empathy that I would want. I know I would want in a nurse.
Mhm.
Not to say that I would want my nurse to have to have gone through what you had to go
Yeah.
through, but nevertheless, but speaking of it from the compassion side, that you
Mhm.
understand what hurting people look like, what that feels like, and so you're able to address your career path in a way
Mhm.
that probably is uniquely different than, say, the average nurse has to, because of just because of the challenges that you had to go through early on. So, but again, appreciate your transparency and transparency in sharing what you have so far, because I just can't even imagine. A child having to experience that. And one other quick thing too, you made mention about your dad. While things didn't work out with your mom and dad because of an affair that he had or whatever, it's clear that despite the breakup, your dad still had some value of importance to you, even though
Yes.
the marriage itself didn't work out. And you
Mhm.
expressed, of course, your displeasure in not being able to tell him what happened, before he had an opportunity to pass. So I bring that up, just as a way of sending a message to any dads who have the opportunity to tune into this episode. If you find yourself apart from your children, it's one thing for the relationship itself between mom and dad not to work out. It's another thing for you to be mindful of the fact that, hey, still try to do everything you can to maintain that connection with your kids, because you just never know the impact that you have on their lives. You just never know what they might be subject to after you have gone. even like I said, even if it was for the wrong reasons, you did something that you shouldn't have done. Nevertheless, you still have kids there. They're going to always be your kids, and you want to make sure that you're there. And as a father of a daughter myself, I just can't imagine, being apart from my child and then knowing that she would have had to been subjected to that, and I wasn't there. To be that support surface for her, to be that voice, to be that listening ear for her in such a moment. So again, thank you for sharing that. So as we move further in your journey, again, you had an unusually overwhelming childhood, but as you already know, as we get older and we go through our experiences in life, there are going to be more things that come across our path, and in the midst of those experiences, every now and then we're going to get hit with some experiences similar to some of the ones you already spoke of, that hit us a little different in a way that it's so overwhelming, it's so heavy that we might find ourselves at some point feeling like, how am I going to ever get out of this situation? So, if you would kind of share with us, whether it's an extension of the story that you've already told, or if you have something different that you'd like to share, what was that experience like for you to be in a situation where it seemed like it was impossible to overcome? It was impossible to break free. What was the turning point? And we can actually just go off the story that you shared, because I don't know if you can give me another story that's going to be even remotely beyond what you've already shared, which is heavy in itself. What was the turning point for you, knowing all that you went through in that childhood and how it impacted your way of dealing with life? Like you talked about being in gangs and being promiscuous and all these other things. When did you finally get the turning point for you personally, where you were able to see some light at the end of the tunnel and coming out of what was otherwise years and years and years of abuse?
Absolutely. So it's a little bit of different age things, but it all has to do with the childhood part too, because it goes hand in hand. Number one, I had divine encounters with the Lord, and I had no idea what was going on. I would have dreams and hear this still but peaceful voice. Um, and I would get messages, and it was all encouraging. But at that point, my father and my grandmother on his side and my mom's side, they were all Catholic. So I would get taken to church, but I didn't understand half the stuff that was going on. And I'm not trying to knock any kind of thing like that, but they don't talk to you about any kind of fruits of the spirit or prophetic giftings or things, different things like that. And so I didn't really have anyone to go to about these encounters, but I remember one particular time that I was feeling suicidal. Um, I want to say I was probably like 14, 15 years old, having already had all those traumas and more. And, you know, uh, feeling like I couldn't do it no more, because most people won't talk about this, but I felt like I was never alive. I felt like I was already in the dying process. I didn't know what it was to be alive. I felt like, just if you imagine someone floating out of space and barely holding on because they just have a long hair that's helping them stay connected to the world. And if it breaks or they let go, they just float onto the abyss. And here I was saying, if this is what living's supposed to be, I don't want to be here. I was in my room weeping and crying. And we lived in some apartments in Corpus Christi by the high school I lived on. And I just remember the bed being saturated with my tears in a large area. And I had a Bible and a crucifix from my grandma that I just said goodbye to. Um, and I was struggling to read the Bible, and I was just begging and pleading. I'm like, hey, I heard you're there. You're supposed to be there, and my heart believes you're there, but I need some kind of help. I'm trying to read your word, but I fall asleep, or I try to read your word and I don't remember the last sentence I just read. Something's wrong, but I need your help. And I just pleaded, if you just help me to understand whatever this is, I promise I'll go tell somebody else and help them too. But I need your help because I don't want to be here. And suddenly I was led to just open the Bible to a certain area, and it was a scripture. I don't remember which one it was because I was so much younger, but it pulled my heartstrings just enough, and I wept. And after that night, I began to have more of these prophetic type of encounters where I would see imagery and hear the voice of the Lord or the angel of the Lord, or or an angelic voice, variations, because it would be different at different times, where I would hear an in depth, deep explanation, similar to the ministries you've heard me do on my pages. And he would tell me these things, and I had no idea it was in the Bible because, again, I struggled with the Bible back then. I would hear it from the Lord Himself. And a lot of times I would walk with Jesus or different things like that. And He would explain things to me. And then when He felt I was ready, He'd say, okay, you can find this in the Bible. It's in my word. But this is my way of um, helping people to apply the word of God in their life. You know, the wording was different in my encounters with the Lord. And so that was one beginning of my turning point. But then later on, by the time I think I was a junior in high school at this point, I did believe, but I didn't truly know the Lord the way I know Him now. I just knew that there had to be. One day, somebody was having a grand opening to a church in Corpus Christi. It was a non-denominational type of church. A friend of me, really, but it was a friend at the time that I thought was my friend. She invited me to the grand opening, and they did a call to the altar, and there was somebody that I believe was a prophet of the Lord. I don't remember his name, but he had come from the San Antonio area. He went to be a blessing and help them open up in the grand opening. And they did altar call, and I felt being pulled and led to go up there, convicted to go up there. And I wanted to leave, but I couldn't leave. And so I got in line and I kept moving and moving to the back. And the reason I did it is because I was horrified because people were receiving deliverance, and I didn't know that they were getting prophetic words that was, pulling things up and out of them. But I just knew that whatever was in me, oppression wise, spiritually, was terrified of that. But who I am in Christ was like, no, I'm staying. I might be going to the back of the line, but I'm staying here. And so by the time it was my turn, there was things I never told anybody, that it was only between me and who did it and the Lord, right? And this man of God began to prophesy to me, and I trembled in the presence of the Lord. I was scared. I remember feeling like I wanted to puke and run all at the same time, but I couldn't because I was arrested in the spirit. Part of me felt saved, but the other part of me was just horrified. If I'm being honest, I didn't know what I was experiencing and what that was. And that person scared me because the Lord was speaking through this person. And I was like, oh God. So I remember leaving as quickly as I could. And the particular person saw whatever spiritual gifting in me, told the people, hey, whoever that young lady was, I need you to go after her. Tell her to contact me. I have a very important message for her, and I'll be here for this long. But the thing is that because I was horrified by what I encountered, I think that's when I first had the true fear of the Lord. um, uh, I avoided calling him on purpose till the last minute. But when I finally did call him back, because I thought, well, he's just going to try to do something to me like the rest of these people have, all these men, brothers and cousins and whoever, so why would he be any different? That's how my mind thought. So when I called the hotel, he was already gone. But everything that I had experienced in the time that thus far began to intensify. And so even though I wasn't quite healed yet, that's when I said, you know what? God is real. I told the Lord, I would the rest of my life, I will say, Jesus is real. He exists. And I'm going to talk about him and tell about him because there's no way that this can't be so. And so I believe that was the first parts of the rest of my life changing.
Mm. Wow, wow. Again, appreciate you sharing that in such transparency and vulnerability, and it's not uncommon for those who don't know that we can be going through a series of storms and challenges in life, and then and you're questioning all along, why is God allowing this, and only to discover later that He's been allowing it not because He wanted to see you hurt, not because He wanted to see you suffer, but it was His way of positioning you to draw nearer to Him, to get you to a point where you said, you know what, I'm going to stop trying to fight this battle by myself in my own strength because it's bigger than me, it's greater than me. I wasn't meant to do this thing alone. I need his covering. I need his guidance to allow me the opportunity to be able to not only get through this situation, but all situations in life. And so we have that sort of, as you probably casually heard before, that come to Jesus moment where you get drawn in,
Mhm.
where God finally brings you in, where you finally decide to give your life to Christ, and the connection is made, the relationship is officially formed, and from there, if you understand what you signed up for, and you see the significance and the value in it, then it becomes a thing that's built upon for the rest of your days. Trying to further strengthen that relationship, getting closer to God, understanding, his purpose for your life, understanding his, getting an understanding of his word, and using that as your ammunition, if you will, your covering, so that as you find yourself in other challenging situations, whether they're circumstantial, whether they're, from a particular, individual that you might come into contact with, building up that level of discernment, all of these things play a role as you build in that relationship with Christ. So, it's a good thing that ultimately you were able to finally make that connection and say, you know what, this is who I need in my life. Jesus is real. His death, burial, and resurrection is a real thing that happened. Believe it. I receive it. I consider it to be the greatest gift of all time, and I'm not letting it go. And so I'm thankful that you had that awakening moment and
Mhm.
was able to be able to allow Jesus into your life and make that connection, as we all should.
Mhm.
But it takes time. For each of us, we all have our respective paths, and it's not always as easy for everybody. But you are an excellent example of, even in the midst of all that you've been through, because with just the experiences alone that you had to go through, it would have been very easy for you to say, I don't want to have any parts to do with God, Jesus, or anything involved with the church. I'm just going to fly solo on my own, whatever that looks like. And if it means, departing this life prematurely, then I'm okay with that too, because this life is not all that great to begin with when I look at what I've had to deal with. But thankfully, you didn't allow yourself to get to the point of giving up.
Mhm.
And again, I think even to that, God can allow you to go through a situation long enough to where, yeah, maybe gets close to that breaking point, but not allow you to actually break. But you needed that experience to go through what you went through. Not about the experience itself, but more so about the bringing you closer to Him and ultimately
Mhm.
entering into a relationship with Him, which is what you did. And and that was kind of an inspiration for me, even though I didn't know all the particular details of your story. That
Mhm.
was one of the inspirations, and even titling our show for today, because if I don't know if you caught it, your show
I
title is
just
"How
saw
I
it.
Fell in Love."
Mhm.
And that was the one of the early things that jumped out to me when I first began to explore your page. It was like, how I fell in love, and now hearing some of the backdrop to what you've gone through and everything. I mean, just to experience and even desire love and understanding what it means in light of your story, how powerful that is. I mean, how can one even want to experience love, or even understand it after you've been through what you've been through? But I'm so glad that not only did you have an opportunity to fall in love, but who you fell in love with, and how you make that a pronouncement that, to the world, that, yeah, when I say how I fell in love, I'm not necessarily just sitting here talking about this random guy that I met here. That I'm talking about the guy, the ultimate one who I fell in love with, who loves me back and loves me in a way that no other can,
Mhm.
unconditionally. That
Mhm.
there are no tricks, there are no games, there's no conditions that, okay, I'll
Mhm.
love you if you do this, that, or the other, like I had to grow
Mhm.
up with. Now I have somebody who loves me for me, all my flaws, all my imperfections, and so that's just a beautiful awakening moment. And I'm glad you had that again, that come to Jesus moment, and
Mhm.
and 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 experience love at its highest level. So
Mhm.
again, appreciate you sharing that.
Sure.
Um, so, Angela, when you do find yourself, and you've had your share of adversity, clearly, but as we know, with storms, sometimes the storms in life, the adversities in life, are very extreme, like some of the things that you've shared, and then
Mhm.
sometimes it's just day to day lifing type stuff,
Mhm.
annoyances that we have to deal with, nevertheless. But what I'm curious to know, now that you have, you know, now have this relationship with Christ and have moved further in your walk and have been able to process through and ignite that healing process of everything that you've gone through. When you do find yourself facing challenging times, adverse moments, if you will, what is it that you like to do that kind of works best for you to face such moments? What's sort of your routine, your regiment that you like to follow, that anytime you face adversity, regardless of its intensity, this is
Hmm.
what works for you.
Oh, well, thank you for asking, by the way. And I want to kind of go back to, because it's part of what you're asking me. When you were saying, thank God it didn't really break me, but it actually did need to break me. A lot of times we have to be broken and we have to be crushed to get the oil out, for a different kind of flame to burn. So I want to be clear about that, because even though that first led me to accepting Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, the struggle wasn't over. It continued on, but what helps me and I like to do is reverting back to the explanation that I had with my walks with Jesus and my experiences in the spirit with him. And it goes back to reflecting on what he told me about relationship. And he said, telling me how I had to forgive all these people. And I was like, what? Like I wasn't having it. And so at this point, I'm courting Jesus. I'm getting to know him and his identity, and he's teaching me about his love and how I'm supposed to love. And he's teaching me the rationale for it. And he tells me it's about relationship. And he told me forgiveness is not just people will tell you differently. They'll say, oh, well, it's not for them, honey, it's for you. But he said, no, it's for everybody. It's for the who did it to you, the person that had it done to them, and those affected by it. And he was saying to me about how much he loved the world, and he was just saying, the world loves according to their own understanding of what they think love is, but I want you to teach them about what love is, and that's the basis and foundation to every relationship, because the proof of what your relationships are like in the world are reflective of your relationship with me. And so if you don't know him and what's like him or of him, you're going to blame him for the things that are not of him. So what I like to do when I'm here having adversity is to go back to what he told me. And so for example, if you look at in the book of Corinthians, I'm not going to read it out to you, but I can summarize it. Chapter 13, verses 4-8, he actually describes to you what love is. The true definition of godly love: it's patient, it's kind, it doesn't keep record of wrongs. And he used that to correct me. And he told me the foundational reason for that, to teach it first to me so that I can teach it to people later on, was that he said when he was asked, is it Corinthians, I think, or John? Wait, okay, there's one that says, if you love me, keep my commandments, which is in the book of John. But in Matthew chapter 22, verses 37-40, he actually is being asked, what is the greatest of these commandments? And he says to first love him with all our heart, all our mind, all our soul. But then he said the second of these is to love your neighbor. And then there's in John chapter 14, verses 15-31, that says, if you love me, keep my commandments. And the lesson that the Lord gave me, is which is what I go to all the time, but it took me many years to get better at it, to where I can show you in through action, was to say, you can't successfully do any other commandment if you're not first doing the one he said is the greatest, which is coming from a place of love, which means that the whole world, starting with yourself, your own accountability, because you have to be yourself less by putting others in front of you. And you have to put the word next to you and ask yourself, am I being patient? Am I being kind? Am I quick to forgive? Am I slow to anger? And it's self accountability first, but then also doing what Jesus did for me, which is how he won my heart over, how he made me fall in love with him. He met me where I was at. He taught me that not everybody's in the same walk. Not everybody's going to dress perfectly or have it all together right away when they take Jesus as their Lord and Savior. Uh, so in order to be a good ambassador of the Lord when I'm going through adversity, is to consider other people's adversities and holding myself accountable, but then going higher, trying to see from the eyes of the Lord and saying, how do I meet this situation or the other person in this adversity? And it's going back to what he said: keep his commandments, starting with the greatest one, love, which means establish relationship and keep it with him, which is how I fell in love with him. But then ongoingly evolving in that relationship, continuing that courtship, and then showing love through action in that adversity.
Love that. Love that. Very, very well said. I appreciate you, breaking down what love truly means from a godly perspective, because you're absolutely right. And it's important that we understand love at that level, because, again, in today's world, we don't oftentimes see it like that. Love is just not reserved for the people that you like and the people who are nice to you and all that. It's also reserved for the people who wrong you, who've done you some kind of way that you weren't deserving of being treated that way. That's what love is. I mean, and then of course, I'm always a big fan in bringing in the forgiveness piece, which a lot of times is easier said than done, but it's necessary,
Mhm.
because, again, that forgiveness piece is actually what ignites your healing process. You
Mhm.
can't begin to heal if you don't forgive. You'll just sit around with these open wounds, hoping for something to happen that's never going to manifest itself if you're not healing. And anybody that knows, especially yourself, being in the nursing field, if a wound stays open long enough and hasn't had the opportunity to go through the healing process, it becomes it's in position to become more infected, to
Mhm.
spread into other areas of your
Mhm.
body. So if you look at it from a spiritual perspective, the same
Mhm.
thing can happen. It can spread to other spiritual aspects of your life, to where you just get separated, where you get isolated, where you just behave in ways that are perhaps outside of what your normal character is. And you spoke to
Mhm.
that earlier about,
Mhm.
I went from being this nice, sweet person, but because of all that was happening to me, and combined with the fact that I wasn't in the mood to forgive, which was understandable in the fleshly
Mhm.
perspective, how it broke you off into to mindsets and ways that just weren't a part of who Angela was. That's not even me, but nevertheless, that's where I was at, because I couldn't
Mhm.
forgive and I was hurting, and I'm walking around with all these open wounds that are
Mhm.
not being tended to. So
Mhm.
I appreciate you sharing that. And then, of course, the last thing, and you're correct in that, and I misspoke when we talk about the importance of being broken. To be
Mhm.
broken is important, and it's a
Mhm.
necessary thing. And there are
Mhm.
scenarios, of course, where God has to allow you to be broken. And
Mhm.
what I meant to clarify was the fact that He didn't allow you to be destroyed. That
Exactly.
that the breaking wasn't something that couldn't allow you to come up out of that situation. but
Mhm.
but God has a way of breaking us all the time, and especially,
Mhm.
and if we're open to receiving, to being broken down and reconfigured and reconstructed, you can come again. You come back to be a better version of what you were beforehand. So there's no crime, there's no punishment in being broken, especially when it's Him, the Creator, who's actually doing the breaking. Because when
Yeah.
He breaks you, He's breaking you in love, and when He puts you back together, it's going to be with the same type of love. But He's fine tuning, He's shaping, He's molding,
Mhm.
He's getting that situation right, to where when you're back to your your new self, that new covering, that new body, if you will,
Mhm.
now you can be used in ways that are far beyond what you were able to be used before. But you had to be broken down, and he had
Mhm.
to dissect you, had to peel you
Mhm.
apart, all those layers and everything. So
Mhm.
those are absolutely gems, that I'm glad that you brought out, because it's necessary for us all, even as believers, to be reminded of that
Mhm.
these moments are necessary from time to time. They don't always feel good. We're not
Mhm.
going to sit here and act like, oh, I just love to be broken. No, we don't. We don't love that. It doesn't feel good, but it's necessary.
Yeah,
It's
can I
necessary
say
from time
something
to
to
time.
that? Because
Yes.
you brought something to my mind, which I think is important for people to know, that if you think of a DNA chain being interrupted somewhere in your generations or in your lifetime, there was something that disrupted the natural DNA that came from God Himself, that interrupted our identity in Christ. And so sometimes He has to go in to pull out the DNA that doesn't belong. And sometimes it might have been there from generations before. Sometimes it was done in your lifetime. And I just want to make sure people are understanding that part, because, I did have those things said to me in my mind, in form of the enemy trying to tell me, oh, if your God loves you so much, oh, what kind of father would let you lose your dad to a freak accident? Who would let you have this? And everybody's been through this kind of negative talk. But when you didn't have people through most of your lifetime to help feed you or teach you the right way. That's why the Lord said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." He's being merciful because it's saying, "Hey, you have yet to have your eyes open and your ears open to the point where you know the DNA of Christ, to be able to recognize what's not of or like Him, so that you can differentiate, was it the doing of God, or was it something that you got happened to you in your own will, or the will of someone else, or in the will of the enemy? So I just want to interject to add that gem in there, because I believe it will help so many people gain another level of understanding and stop misunderstanding Jesus himself, or the behavior and actions of a Christian at a different walk with Jesus, and how they didn't mean to, but because they didn't know better, might have misrepresented Jesus as an ambassador, because they haven't grown where they should be to be the one in your face trying to teach you that. Yeah.
Absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely. And what other quick thing as you were going through that
Sure.
came to mind is when you made mention earlier, which is so true, and a
Mhm.
lot of people misinterpret, is that even when you decide to make that commitment to enter into a relationship with Christ, you're giving your life to Christ,
Mhm.
understanding that it's not an overnight fix as to what you might be dealing with. I mean, you
Mhm.
you spoke of yourself. It took me years to
Mhm.
get to where I am today, and again, it's a lifelong process. So there is never
Absolutely.
a point where okay, I'm here, I've arrived, and everything is perfect from here on out. You give
Mhm.
your life to Christ, and I've oftentimes said this. To be quite honest, as wonderful of a decision that it is to give your life to Christ, not only is it going to take time for you to grow and build, but also understand that the attack, if you thought the betrayals and those and the like was there before you gave your life to Christ,
Mhm.
that intensifies because now you have an enemy out there who's angry, who's furious at the decision that you've made. So now the attacks are going to become more and more, much more intense. They're going to become much more frequent. That he's constantly strategizing to figure out how can I uh, deter you from this path that you're now on in following Christ. The difference, however, is that before you gave your life to Christ, you were trying to do it by yourself. Now you
Mhm.
have God in your corner. If he's on your team, then there is no scenario where you lose in that situation. It doesn't matter what the enemy wants for you and how he wants to come at you, whatever. You have the necessary power source, if you will, on your side. Whereas before, when you were just trying to operate solo and occasionally we throw on our Superman or our Supergirl coat on, our cape on, trying to save the day and be the hero of ourselves. I'm gonna fight you. Okay, well, while it may be a noble thought to have in mind, the reality is that there's an enemy out there that is very strong, very powerful, knows you better than you know you, and
Mhm.
knows how to exploit those weaknesses. But with God on your side, with you being in relationship with Him, if He's on my team, if we're connected relationally, then
Mhm.
now my ability to respond in such moments is going to be completely different than what it was when I was trying to do life without Him. So I just wanted to make sure we added that into and make sure that
Mhm.
that message is understood as well. We're not trying to promise you a quick fix microwave overnight when we're trying to pitch, being in relationship with God. That's not what we're trying to do. But we are
Mhm.
trying to tell you the power that He has, the love that He has, the
Mhm.
wisdom that He has, the authority that He has is like none other. There's nothing that you can find, no one that you can find that will compare
Mhm.
to it.
Mhm.
So with that said, Angela, if you had an opportunity to sit across from the younger version of you, that young girl who she's confused, she's struggling, she's feeling hopeless, helpless. I mean, just feels like the world is caving in so much so that she doesn't even know if she wants to even be here anymore,
Mhm.
because it's become such a down, a disenchantment, such a disappointing existence every day. If you
Mhm.
had a chance to speak to her, to drop some nuggets of wisdom that you wish that perhaps she would have had, that you think might have been of help to her, or just take into consideration the fact that somebody is going to have an opportunity to tune into our episode and they are dealing with some of the same stuff that you had to endure with yourself. They're afraid to say something. They don't know who to tell. Even as adults, it might have happened years ago and they're still carrying that weight, that burden. It's making it difficult for them to even get into relationships with other people, even people who mean them well, but they can't
Mhm.
even receive the love from them because they're still walking around with these wounds and hurt and the pain that has been unresolved, all the unforgiveness and all of the like of that. What would be your words of encouragement, your words of inspiration that you would have for them that you think would be helpful in processing such situations? Or again, the younger version of you, if you could talk to her, seeing the tears in her eyes, what would you say to her?
I would absolutely tell her that what she was taught to believe, or was never really shown, was that she's been lied to all her life, that she's not what anybody said in form of verbal or emotional abuse, what they said about her. She's who God says she is. I would tell her that she was right to believe that there is a Jesus there and that he's the father of truth, but the enemy is the father of lies. The devil is the father of lies, and he would like nothing more than to have you believe that you're running from him all the lies all through your life, or that you're trying to escape from him so that you can get tired and maybe give up. That really the only power he has in you never knowing the truth about God. And what I mean by that is saying that you have the authority even as a child. God's word didn't change because I was a little girl. I just didn't know better. And so I would tell her, hey, I came back for you. Get up. You could have got up all along. You're running to Jesus, not from the devil. You're running to Jesus. He's there for you to hold you and heal you. But I would also say what the Lord said to me, which is he does have authority, but you have more authority over him. He goes under your feet. He said, he's not fighting you. He's fighting the inevitable about you. He's fighting the inevitable about you because he knows that it will end in victory. So if as long as he could steal away your joy or have your wounds never be healed and mended and whole, then you might continue to drink or be promiscuous or snort cocaine or have a sharp tongue to hurt the people that hurt you, so that he would have you never heal. But you've been lied to all along. And yes, you wanted somebody to come back for you, but you were one of the ones chosen to get up and cross the line, but then come back for people yourself. So I'd say, get up. And as we walk back, I'd be telling her all that Jesus taught me and how I fell in love with him. And I want to help her do the same.
Mm. That's powerful. That's powerful. And I'm gonna add to this that I want you to comment on. For I don't know if there'll be a young lady who's currently going through abuse, that might tune into this episode, but there may be a mom who's in a relationship who knows that that significant other is abusing her children, and she's afraid to say something. She's afraid, whether it be because of the loss of financial security, or afraid because of physical harm that might be caused upon them because of a controlling mate that's in their life. What do you say to her? That mom who knows that things are not right and that her children are being negatively harmed by that, but she doesn't know how to ask for help. She doesn't know how to escape from that. What would you say to her to say this is what you need to do, or could need to consider doing to get out of such a dark situation?
I would say sister or even brother, because it happens to men too. Men do get physically abused. Men have gone through assault. So I say, in general, that you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. That you abide under the shadow of the Almighty and you are hidden in the secret place of the Most High. Go to a safe place and get help. And even though it's scary and hurtful, and you might have an issue with identity because of the things you've gone through, I'm going to hold you accountable with me to stop the abuse, to speak up and do something about it, because I felt like, when is somebody going to help in this for me? Maybe you've gone through it, and or maybe you feel like, hey, I just don't want to be alone, and if I let him go, and you're so tied up in that web that you feel like, well, I'll lose him. But would you rather lose your soul and lose your child's soul by doing nothing? There is help out there. There's help in the Lord, but there are resources in the community. But the first step is to be accountable enough to say, hey, I deserve better. I don't have to accept this. God has better for me and my children, and I choose to do something about it. That's what I would say.
Awesome, awesome. And one more thing, and I usually don't bridge off of this particular question, but because of the nature of the subject and what you've shared so far, the last piece of advisement and encouragement that I'd like for you to offer in regards to this is for the ones, whether it be male or female, who
Mhm.
they're no longer in that abuse cycle. They've gotten past that, but the scars, the wounds are still there, and it's affecting their ability to move on and into other relationships. They're still struggling with the whole concept of forgiving. What do
Mm.
you say to them?
I'd say sign the consent. And when I'm saying sign the consent, I want you to imagine going in. needing a heart surgery or a major surgery that is required for the infection to be removed and for your heart to be transformed into something new. Because when you show up actually and it's time for your surgery, you have to give permission. But in the permission, you're giving permission for the surgery and what needs to be moved and changed out of you. But you're also giving consent for the anesthesia, which is, I find the word of God saying, be still and know that I am God. That he has a steady hand to remove the source of your pain. That not only does he want to remove the source, but that he wants to give you the solve and the blood transfusion of the blood of Jesus to completely make you whole and make your heart and heart soft again and to renew your mind so that the enemy can't have you forever have that bottomless pit that's never healed and you're pouring all this alcohol into or using drugs or promiscuity or gambling or pornography or whatever it is that you've been enslaved to as a result of that trauma. I'm saying to sign the consent, be still and know that he's God, that he's doing a new work in you. My God, I could even feel the presence right now. That if you just be willing to show up and allow God to do the work and you just be still, he'll do the rest. And when he's done, he'll put you in a place, a secret place, kind of like a surgical ICU when you come out of that surgery, that you can continue your healing process and you have been made new. And as you've been made new, you don't want to cross contaminate with those that are still bleeding all over the place and full of infection by way of toxic relationships. So I say, if you just be willing to court the Lord a little bit by getting in the word or being around people that are believers or that have been through something with you that won't be judging you to help guide you to navigate through that. But understand that when you've gone through that surgery, the Lord will only allow certain access, just like the intensive ICU. When people have had their heart transplants, only certain level of doctors can be there, only certain nurses, only specific trained people that know how to prevent cross contamination and take good care of you can have access. But when you leave that place, don't go back. When you leave that place, know that you've already been transformed by the renewing of your mind, that he's done a new thing in your life. And I want to say this last thing as you consider that. Something the Lord was telling me is that so many are so focused on what they've been through. But the reason why people are always saying, you don't know my story, you don't know what I've been through, and people say, well, you don't look like what you've been through. It's not to offend you. It's because he never intended your identity to become what you went through, but what he got you through, which is your true identity. That he got you through it. You're still here today because he got you through it because you're in his identity. So that's just what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much for
You're
sharing
very
that.
welcome. Mhm.
I really appreciate that. I just felt like it was necessary for us to really break that thing down because,
Mhm.
again, unfortunately, abuse, like you said, be it male
Mhm.
or female,
Mhm.
people are actively going through it or still dealing with the aftershock of it, even though it may
Mhm.
not currently be going on right now, and it affects so many areas. So, those words of encouragement and inspiration that you just shared, I think are very not only very powerful, but I think that's going to bless somebody. That's going to bless somebody. I'm confident of that. So,
Can I add one last thing,
yes.
just to help people have a perspective? I know a lot of us are challenged in relationships as a result of different things we went through in life. You have to understand that if you've been in a fight or flight mode, you're only capable of seeing in that tunnel vision of what you've experienced. And so it requires the person or those around them to change their perspective and perception. But understand, if you're going through the world feeling inflamed from the infection of whatever has afflicted that person, they're going to respond in a place of love and from that place of whatever they're capable of seeing in their visual field. And so I just want to challenge people, if you just be willing to change your perspective and perception and consider most of the people in the world are in their own spiritual tunnel vision. They're in their own fight or flight mode. And if we consider them, we won't take as much offense when we feel a type of way if we said hi and they didn't even hear us because they're in that mode. They didn't hear us, they weren't paying attention. If we understand that some people are walking through the world inflamed from the pain that they've endured, um, and just get in relationship with the Lord so that we can be washed clean of those things so that you can finally be ready to be in healthy relationships, I think that we can go forward even better as a community, as a people in the world, as lovers of Jesus, whether we're new or recommitting or elevating our walk with the Lord. Whatever Wherever we're at, the Lord will meet you where you're at, and that's just what I want to say to close.
Absolutely love that. Thank you
Thank you.
for
Mhm.
bringing that full circle there to close that out.
Absolutely.
That's
Hmm.
great. That's great. Well, Angela, this has been such an awesome conversation that I've had. Far exceeded anything that I could have ever imagined in terms of just your vulnerability, your transparency, and sharing as you have. And again, I've been blessed, and I know my listeners will be blessed as a result
Thank
of
you.
you pouring out as you have. And so I'm so thankful, so appreciative that God allowed for us to connect and for you to have this opportunity to be a part of this podcast experience, and know that anytime you want to come back on the show, you're more than welcome to do so, because I would love to have you. And because as I know that we can't even capture in the short time that we've been together today, all that you have that to be able to pour and be of
Hmm.
encouragement to somebody. So
Hmm.
I'm definitely appreciative of that. But before I let you go,
Hmm.
as is customary here on the Blessings in the Streets podcast, I do want to give you an opportunity. I should say, I want to give us the opportunity to celebrate you, to acknowledge you, to love on you. So if you got anything that's going on right now or coming up, be it personally or professionally or a little bit of
Hmm.
both, doesn't matter. Please
Hmm.
share that with us. Let us know what's happening with Angela that we need to be aware of and keeping up with and connecting with, and how can we be of support to you and the like in that regard. So tell us what's coming up down the pike or going on right now for you.
Well, I'm actually working on a book that's actually about the first 19 years of my life. I had not finished a certain transition to completely finish the book, and when I thought I was getting there, the Lord said, "No, you need to add on to that." So, some of these lessons that I was speaking to y'all on, the Lord has asked me to add that in form of like a workbook, either in or alongside this book. And the book is called "Undefeated Race to Grace." It will be in brick and mortars, but it'll also be which I mean like the physical stores, but it'll also be on Amazon and different other platforms. And the plan with that is the Lord is wanting me to turn those into seminars and conferences where I can go a little bit more in depth and kind of work with some people and give them some ideas to um, first hear about some of the in-depth stories that I talk about in more detail as a child, but then how the Lord navigated me through those things and have them kind of put notes how that applies in their life. So again, it's called Undefeated Race to Grace, and through the grace of God, I'll get that finished and ready to go. I do believe that at some point I will, not necessarily a podcast, but I think I want to try to get money together to have a little series so that we can have chats like this, but I can sit and talk with people and give testimony and kind of meet them where they're at so we can kind of navigate together. Seeing myself walking back from that finish line, going back to those ones that need someone to help them up on their race to find grace. So I'm excited about that. And through the grace of God, I'm praying that I can recover from what we just went through, and hopefully in the next couple of months get everything up and running. And I'm more than happy to share when it's ready. And if you would like to follow me on social media, on Facebook, I'm just under Angela Kimble. I have a group called United Siblings in Jesus Christ, also under Facebook. And then I have a clubhouse room called United Siblings in Jesus Christ, which is also us in JC. On TikTok, you could find me at Race to Grace, just the number two Grace. And then Instagram is divinely.favored one, with just the number one.
All right, all right. Well, listeners, you know how to connect with Angela. Multitude of ways. I'm looking
Mhm.
forward, of course, to your book coming out when it's the appropriate time for that to happen, and I'm sure that'll be an amazing story. That'll again be a blessing to many. So, thank you for that, and
Thank
again,
you.
thank you for your presence on the show today. Definitely
Absolutely.
appreciate it. And for my listeners, if you've enjoyed our podcast episode today, or just the podcast in general, please share, please subscribe, please like, please comment, because here at the Blessings in the Streets podcast, this is what it's all about. We want to encourage, we want to uplift, we want to use our personal testimonies, our personal journeys, being in a transparent and vulnerable way with the hopes, again, of encouraging and inspiring others that might be going through moments of adversity and challenges in life. Just
Mhm.
reminding you that everybody goes through stuff. We all have our battles, we all have our challenges, but
Mhm.
they don't have to define who we are. It doesn't have to be the end of our story. We can take take these moments and grow and develop in such circumstances and allow God to navigate that path along the way. And if you don't currently have a relationship with God, I'm sure Angela can testify to this as well. We would encourage you to today would be a mighty fine day to make that happen. And I promise you it'll be the best decision that you ever made in life. So with that
Amen.
said, remember, here at the Blessings in the Streets podcast, this is a place where your story is your glory, where your relationships are relevant, and your journey is your joy. I am your host, Joseph B. Roberts. Thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, you keep fighting that good fight, keep maintaining that faith. Quit trying to do life on your own. Bring God into that to your life. Be in relationship with Him. I promise you, you won't be steered the wrong way. He will guide you. He will cover you. He will love you like no other, unconditionally, with all your flaws and all your imperfections. He just wants us to be dependent upon Him, so He can show you just how awesome and mighty and powerful that He is, and that He has your best interest at heart, and how He can use you to do works that are beneficial for the advancement of His kingdom, so that you can be upright and in alignment with His will for your life and your purpose. So until next time, you take care of yourselves. I look forward to seeing you again on our next show. Until then, you have a great rest of your day.